While many countries are facing uncertainty due to new trade policies in Washington, China is so far the only nation to actually have tariffs placed on its goods entering the U.S. So what does it mean for the world's second largest economy? Joining us now to discuss is Haining Zha, VP and Director for Asset Allocation Research at TD Asset Management. Haining, great to have you back on the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Interesting times, lots to talk about. Let's talk about trades, tariffs, and the impact on the Chinese economy. What are we seeing?
Yeah, so as you know, U.S. put an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods. So in terms of economic impact, 10% is actually undershot people's expectation. So if you look at the Trump's campaign trail speech, he's talking about 60%, right? So right now, the average weighted tariff rate on Chinese goods is around 15%. So if you add on another 10%, amount to 25%, is still far away. And in terms of the economic impact, 10% tariff hike is roughly equivalent to 0.4% of GDP hit. So it's definitely a headwind to China, but I think right now, given that it is undershot market consensus, it is actually interpreted as good news.
Okay, interpreted as good news. That's interesting. Of course, what we always concern ourselves with is if we see one country, impose tariffs or heighten tariffs against one, then there's a retaliation, a response from the other country. How are we seeing that playing out in China right now?
Yeah, China is definitely doing some retaliation, but it's more of a token retaliation. They're actually designed to de-escalate rather than escalate. So, for example, China had retaliation on multiple fronts. Number one, China imposed anywhere from 10 to 15% tariff on roughly 15 billion of US goods. So, and number two, China launched some antitrust investigation on some of the big US corporations, for example, Google and potentially Apple. And number three, China tightened up the control on some of the critical minerals. But if you look at the details of it, for example, the 10 to 15% tariff is targeting towards LNG, crude, some of the farm equipment. They are not really going to hurt US. And if you look at antitrust probe, Google, almost nothing, no business in China. Apple has a lot of business, but China is not formally doing it, so they are leaving a bit of room. And for the criminal export control, they are not doing outright ban. So if a corporation has legitimate use, they can still apply for a quota. So, so it's really aiming for de-escalation rather than escalation.
All right, interesting dynamics at play there. You did mention there's a bit of a headwind here from these trade policies to the Chinese economy. What should we expect in terms of a fiscal response or a monetary policy response from China?
Yeah, actually this year we continue to expect a very supportive policy from the Chinese government. So in terms of monetary policy, this year we expect another 40 basis points cut in the benchmark interest rate. And also we expect another 1% cut in reserve requirement ratio to release more liquidity. And in terms of fiscal policy, that's what the market focus is. It's also set up to be in a very positive way. For example, last year, the budget deficit, official narrowly defined budget deficit is around 3%. This year, they are probably going to expand it to 4%. And beyond the narrowly defined measure, so in terms of special treasury issuance, this year they'll probably have additional $2 trillion, 2 trillion RMB. And also in terms of local government bond issuance, there will be additional 1 trillion expansion. So the overall setup looked really good.
We've talked a lot about the current issues facing China and trade uncertainty. Over the years, you come on the program, talked about other parts of the Chinese economy that were challenged even before we had to worry about global trade and tensions there. How are other things developing there? Property, other parts of the Chinese economy?
Yeah, for example, the property is still going to be a very challenging area for the Chinese economy. Last year, just to give you one data point, the real estate investment is down 10%, and this is the third consecutive year of downturn. So if you look at the average magnitude of the decrease, it's basically 10% every year. And if you look at the sales, the gross floor space sold, last year it is also down double digit, down something like 14%. You basically see very little improvement from the prior year, But this year, given the more supportive policy, we think the setup is kind of more benign. And also, when you look at the year to date, for example, look at the home sales across different tier of cities. We are seeing more positive trend in the tier 1 city. For tier 2 and tier 3, they are still a little bit more challenged, but we are seeing some green shoots in the second home market. So the setup doesn't look bad.
Interesting things. In that part of the economy, of course, there's a big tech economy in China as well. Was it just earlier this week, Xi Jinping meeting with some of the big tech leaders, including Jack Ma? What should we make of that?
Yeah, so that is really a big deal. So President Xi rarely chairs such symposium and meeting, a whole group of corporate leaders. So when that happened, the Chinese government, instead of putting on very heavy crackdown on those tech companies, now they are turning much more supportive, so which is good news. And I think many of the corporate leaders, they are getting a confidence boost from meeting like this.
So we put all that together. What should investors be thinking about China, its markets, its economy right now?
Well, investors probably should think about the potential re-rating of the Chinese equity. So a few days ago, there was actually a famous report, a research report from the sell side, and the topic is China is eating the world. Basically, it's talking about the improvement in many of the sectors in the Chinese economy, where the innovation and the capability is actually beyond people's expectation. But given all of these macro headwinds, people ignore all of that. So given that the setup is turning more positive, maybe it's time for people to take a second look of that second largest economy of the world.